All right, let's get started. Let me get what I need here. Oops, I want to first share the bracha again. Okay, I want to do tonight. Now, last week, we spent time, pretty much most of the class, about dealing with the Shekhinah. The reason being, of course, that the end of the bracha, as you see in front of you, Amachazir Shekhinah Tzion, want to understand what is it we're asking Hashem to return to Tzion. I want to go tonight and go through the bracha itself. We'll get through part of it. I don't know if we'll get through the whole thing, to discuss a number of questions that were raised a little while ago, including what really is this bracha about. Okay, so I'm not going to keep that on the screen, just as a frame of reference. And let me get my stuff here. Okay, so we normally just call the bracha Retzey because of the first word, but the Gemara refers to this as the bracha of Hoda'ah. We will see. Well, that's not actually true. We'll see what we're going to talk about. It's avodah. It's more accurate. Service of Beit HaMikdash. We're going to come to that. I don't want to jump ahead too far. So the first words would say that's one of the reasons we just call it. So, like I said, the simple quote unquote problem is what exactly is this bracha about? Because it seems on the surface that it's really the same bracha or same request as we had in Shema Kol. We're asking Hashem to accept our tefillah. It's pretty much what it seems like. Yes, the ending talks about the Beit HaMikdash. Yes, we talk about Machazir Shekhinah Tolet Tzion, returning of God's Shekhinah to Tzion, to Yerushalayim. But it kind of seems a little extra. So I say it kind of leaves us a little bit wondering as to what exactly the Chachamim thought about when they were talking about this last section of Shemona Esrei. We have to keep in mind, I've said it many, many times, but especially now we have to keep in mind that this Shemona Esrei is broken down into three sections. The first three brachot, the middle section, which is the individual requests, and the last three brachot, which are, I'm going to describe right now, it's just like saying goodbye to Hashem, so to speak. Not goodbye, but we will talk about a topic called taking leave. I'll get into that in a little while, but why is it that Shema Kolenu, the bracha just before this, falls in the request category, and Retzey falls into the section of Hodaya? The last section, the first section is called Shevach, giving praise to Hashem. The middle is the Bakashot, the requests. And the last of the third section, Shemona Esrei, starting with Retzey, is known as Hodaya, or Thanksgiving. By the way, we use the word Hodaya and Hoda'ah interchangeably. There's a slight difference, but basically the same idea. So why is it the Shema Kolenu is a request, and Retzey is a thanksgiving? I think it's important to add here why we need to know this distinction, to mention it again, is having to do with personal requests. You want to add something to Shemona Esrei. So we said if a person's, God forbid, sick, and you could daven for them in Rifa'enu, person needs parnasah, you can daven for them in Barech Aleinu. But in the first three brachot, in Shevach, in the last three brachot, Hoda'ah or Hodaya, you can't ask for anything personal. You want to ask for something personal, you have Shema Kolenu, you have the individual bracha, you have at the end of the Shemona Esrei by Hiyul Ratzon, which we'll discuss. But in the Shevach, in the beginning, and the Hodaya at the end, you don't ask any. You can't ask for anything personal. I'm going to read you a few lines in the Gemara and Brachot. I have it translated to English. It says the first, and kind of like describes a little bit about the Shemona Esrei in general, like I was. The first three are like a servant who presents his master's praises. The second section of the Shemona Esrei is like a servant who's asking for a prize from his Adon, from his master. And the last one is like a servant who receives a prize from his master and is taking leave and will be going from his presence. So it's obvious that the last three brachot are not talking about requests. It can't be, which is why you can't add a personal request. So the question is, why specifically is this concept of taking leave and going, why is it like asking for almost like a prize from the master, from God? The prize is accepting tefillah. Um, so we have to discuss this idea of taking leave, what that really means. The section I said, the last three brachot are called hodaya, which means the idea of gratitude. Lahodot in Hebrew means to admit. It also means to thank. Okay, just a second. The definition is actually given by the Rambam, the very beginning of his Hilchot Tefillah, and he says that this section is called the Hodaya, but the second of the brachot itself, Modim, is also called Hodaya, which is the theme of the all three brachot, the last section. So the section itself is called Hodaya or Hodaya, and Modim is called Hodaya. So we have to kind of clarify what all this is about. This idea of what this section of Shemona Esrei is about will give us, I think, a good outlook or framework, it for the entire Shemona Esrei, because it's really different than what many people feel or imagine. Very often, people feel they have to have or need to have some form of a religious experience when they come in order to come closer to God, requesting something important. But there's something that in this interaction with Hashem in Shemona Esrei that is forgotten in the general framework of what Shemona Esrei is all about. We can understand easily the first section. Give you a good example. I actually gave this to a student today. You have a request. You're going to go to the king, human king. You have a request, and for some reason you have access to the king. You do not walk in and say, "Hey, I need my street paved. I need a new, front door on my door. The country should be paying for all the." My dear Lord, my liege, my king, my beneficent, my magnificent, whatever. You kind of say certain things. That's understandable. That's the beginning of Shemona Esrei. You don't run right into Hashem, so to speak, and ask for what you want in Shemona Esrei. Then we ask for our things, and then we are going to be doing something. And what is that something? In democracy, in a democratic country, where there's a president or there's a prime minister, people have certain rights. People have rights. There's the concept of the egalitarian level of society, which means that, even one example, one person, one vote, unless you're in Cook County in Chicago. One person, one vote. Every person has the right, based on certain parameters, to run for an office and to vote for an office. Every person, theoretically, is equal. And we don't really like the idea of kind of looking at society as classes. Yes, we do in our minds, at least, we divide it into socioeconomic classes, religious classes, the haves and the have-nots, the upper crust, whatever your terminology is. We do that. But in theory, that's not really what our society, the democratic society, is, because it's a very Jewish concept that all men are created equal. But we've really lost this whole metaphor of king and servant. And I think we have to spend a couple minutes on this before we go any further to really understand what this part of Shemona Esrei is about. On Rosh Hashanah, on the night of Rosh Hashanah, we have a job. That job is lahamlich kudsha richu, to accept Hashem as our melech. We also know that in Shemona Esrei and Musaf, we have a section called Malchuyot, which is the concept of Hashem being our melech. The word melech is repeated over and over and over during the davening of Rosh Hashanah for a very specific reason, because Hashem is our melech. We refer to Hashem as in our brachot. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu, he's our God. Melech haolam, he's the king of the universe. And we use it very often. You'll find metaphors and stories. There's the king in the forest, and the old man, the king comes to visit him. But because most of us live in countries where even if you live in the UK and there's a king, you have King Charles, it's not the same thing as if you were to go back a few hundred years where there was a feudal system with the king and the lords and then the serfs of the lower class, to put it mildly. This relationship between servant and king is just so far removed from who we are in quote modern society. Um, we don't really have a natural model for such a relationship. We're used to either the relationship between president or prime minister and the civilians, what do you call them, citizens of the country. We're used to that. Yes, there's a king, like I say, for example, in the UK, and they are his subjects. But it's only in name. It's not like the king is going to come down and take their property and their wives and their servants and all, which, by the way, was something was theoretically possible in years past, and also even when there was a Jewish king in Israel. But the halachic expressions of kavod, yirah, meaning being respectful and in awe and in fear, is not as common even among people today as it was. Just go back 50 years. I'll give you a good example. When I was growing up, if another teacher walked into the room, not forget the principal, another teacher would walk in the room, or the person who was cleaning the room came in to take out the garbage. Was an adult, you stood up. I grew up, my generation grew up, everybody of my parents' age, their friends, was always Mr. and Mrs. or Rabbi and Mrs. There was no calling someone by their first name. The This concept of distance. I'm not talking about right now with Israel, the difference. One of the big differences, I've been asked this, teaching in Israel versus teaching in Chutz La'aretz, is a lack of distance between student and teacher, which is for a different discussion, not for tonight. I'm just doing these as examples. And why does this, and how did this change over time? This idea of freedom and equality. And so there's this almost a diminution, this concept of looking at the older generation with more respect. I'll tell you, I had a person I grew up calling Rabbi So-and-so, friend of my parents. And I referred to him that way my whole life. And a number of years back, we were already colleagues at this point because he was the rabbi of a shul, I was a rabbi of a shul, but I still called him Rabbi So-and-so. And he's called me over one day. And he was 100% serious. He said, I don't like it that you call me Rabbi X. I want you to call me by my first name. I said, it's very difficult for me to do that. He says, I know, because of the generation you grew up in and my generation, the relationship, but we're colleagues. When I became the rabbi of the shul, the rabbi who was before me, actually two before me, who was the rabbi of the shul when I was growing up, I knew him as Rabbi Frank. So at the beginning of my tenure, I still called him that. He says, you can't call me that anymore. I said, I'm not going to call you by your first name. There's not a chance. You were my rabbi growing up. So we compromised. I called him Rav Yaakov. But this idea of adult or older generation, younger generation, this respect in some form, depending on the situation, awe, is not as common anymore. The first two sections of Shmona Esrei, we talk about the praise before the requests, because praise is still something in a normal society. We want to make sure we don't just jump on somebody to ask for something. We want to talk to the person for a couple of moments. Requests are still requests. Now, it's giving praise to someone is a common thing, even not in the rubric of asking for something. Well, that's, that was a really good speech. That was what you did for that family, for that person was great. Thank you so much for just being there for whatever it might be, what you do for people. It's normal. And asking for things is also normal. Do me a favor when you go there, could you stop and pick something up for me? Whatever it might be, that's a normal thing. Requests are requests, praise is praise. It's this third section of Shmona Esrei that gives us pause. We have to kind of wrap our heads around, try to come up with a different almost rubric in our head of what's going on. And I've used the term already 2 or 3 times, and I'm going to talk about it. It's called in English called taking leave. The only place nowadays I've seen this in action has been when I've visited with friends, or I'm aware of that when you would leave the presence of a Hasidic Rebbe, you go to ask for Rebbe for bracha, whatever it might be, to talk for Eitzot, that when you kind of like give a little bit of a bow, you back out backwards, you don't want to turn your back on the Rebbe. Again, it depends on the person's relationship to the Rebbe. And that's a concept of taking leave. You see it all the time, of course, at the Kotel. When people get to a certain point, they walk facing the Kotel, walk backwards. Don't do what I did, which is fall backwards one time doing that. So that's why I don't really do it too often. And that's the idea of taking leave from Hashem's Shekhinah, his presence, by the Kotel HaMaravi and Har HaBayit. Taking leave, though, still has this ring in our head of feudalistic society. Again, that's where you just saw this when we were talking in Jewish history last week, 2 weeks ago, the different levels of society. You had the king, you had the aristocrats, and everything below. The first, second, what was called in England, the first, second, and third estate. That idea of the feudalistic lord and king, lowercase l, it doesn't really exist nowadays. What does it mean taking leave? In a sense, you're really asking for permission to leave. I'm not talking you're someone's house there for Shabbat, for a meal, or you're visiting, and you say, look, I'm sorry, it's okay with you, I should get going. You're not really asking them permission. You're just being polite. But when you are in a situation, in go back a few hundred years, when a knight, Knight, was in the presence of his lord, he couldn't just walk away. He had to ask permission, or a servant from the king or from the master had to ask permission. That's called in English taking leave. It's asking for permission to leave. In order to leave, what did you have to do? Again, I'm talking very general terms. Historically, what would happen when you would take leave from the Lord? Well, again, lowercase l, or from the king, you would bless the king. You would thank the king for his graciousness. In Hebrew, we would use the word shalom. We wanted to wish peace to the king. And that actually is the theme of the last bracha in Shemona Esrei. We know that seems shalom, or shalom rav, if it's mincha for Nusach Ashkenaz. It's interesting, just as a parenthetical statement, Nusach Ashkenaz says sim shalom in the morning, and mincha says shalom rav, and mar says shalom rav. Nusach Sfard says sim shalom in the morning, sim shalom at mincha, and shalom rav in the evening. And Nusach Adot Mizrach, we say all 3 times just sim shalom. We never say shalom rav. Different customs, which we'll maybe talk about when we get to the last bracha of Shemona Esrei. So in a very general term, when we're taking leave from Hashem, in quotes, it means we're trying to express an idea that's, again, somewhat foreign to us, that we're leaving the immediate presence of Hashem to go back out into the world. There is a very strong indication of how we do this, of course, in Shemona Esrei, that we step back. We call it stepping out of Shemona Esrei, stepping back from Shemona Esrei. We'll talk about, when we get to the end, about how to do that properly, and some of the mistakes people might make with that. But we already know intuitively that when you're leaving Shemona Esrei, you don't just stop. There's only one time you just end. You don't stop, and it's only only time I've ever seen it is in Moroccan shul on Tisha B'Av, at night and in the morning. At the end of davening of Shemona Esrei, it just ends. There's no stepping out. There's no anything. It just kind of comes to an abrupt stop. But I've not seen that in any other Nusach. It may be. I've never seen it. So we're at least somewhat familiar to this idea of stepping back, of taking leave from the king. These last 2 brachot, meaning Modim and Sim Shalom, fit fine into this scheme of what we're talking about. Because the first one, Modim, is gratitude, which obviously we'll have to talk about at length. The gratitude is not for thanking Hashem for all the requests we've asked Him for, and we're expecting to hopefully get something. But as we say in Modim, we're thanking Hashem for everything, literally everything, for the breath we take, every breath you take, every move you make. And then the last bracha of Shalom is the fulfillment of Hashem's creation in this world, realization of His relationship with this world. In human terms, we're wishing Hashem, again, as it were, Shalom. So we have to come back to those two brachot. But the first bracha of the final three, where we're stuck right now, and I say stuck because it's unclear, of Retzey, we have to understand, in light of the idea of leave taking, how does this first of the three final brachot fit into this whole scheme of avodah? Or how does avodah, the service of Hashem, and specifically Beit HaMikdash, fit into the leave taking? So let's talk about that. We talked about a long time ago. There are two types of avodah, more, but two that we focused on. One is the avodah of Beit HaMikdash, and the one time that most during the year plays a very strong presence in davening is Musaf on Yom Kippur, where depending on your nusach, it's either long or extremely long, a recollection of all the steps and all the things that Kohen Gadol did and all the people did, and the whole thing with the sending the lamb, the sacrificial lamb, to its end. So that's where the avodah, and of course the avodah itself, the time of the Beit HaMikdash, which is what Hashem will have a chance to see soon. The other is what's called avodah shebalev. Avodah shebalev, the work of the heart. Again, this is where we started our whole class a long time ago. Is tefillah. If a person's tefillah is from here, or his mouth or her mouth, and out, there's no heart involved, no mind involved. It's just like, wait, I was in the middle of Shemona, I don't remember where I am. But that happens sometimes. It happens. But if it happens all the time, or you don't even remember if you said Shemona Esrei, obviously something's missing. The avodah shebelev is missing. It's just avodah, it's just words. Does it count? It counts as davening. You did your mitzvah, but it's not the same thing. But in this bracha, the word avodah that we referred to is the service in the Beit HaMikdash. What did that entail? Well, obviously it entailed korbanot, sacrifices, lighting them in. In other words, if I was to ask you what was the avodah in Beit HaMikdash, 99% of people say korbanot, and it's true. It's sacrifices, but it's much more than just sacrifices. There's also the lighting of the menorah. There's the incense, the ketoret that was burned, all kinds of other procedures. It was the lechem hapanim, the showbread. It was just many things. Even though the word avodah is only mentioned twice in the bracha of Retzey, it's clear from the chatima, remember this, the bracha itself, that we're talking about the whole idea that the Beit HaMikdash is central to this bracha, machazir shechinato l'tzion. And just before that, what do we say? Let's take a look again at the bracha. Take a look one more time, where we started this evening. Right? We want Hashem, we want our eyes to be able to see return of Hashem to Tzion. Before that, we ask about Tekabel b'ratzon, tiratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha. Here's the word avodah. Hashevet ha'avodah lidvir beitach, which we said refers to the idea of the first Beit HaMikdash, the word dvir. Hamachazir shechinato l'tzion. All that points to the idea of that we're desperate, so to speak, for this avodah, the Beit HaMikdash, whatever it's going to look like in times of Mashiach, to be back. We want that. And the theme, therefore, of Retzey is the return of the service in Beit HaMikdash, the temple service. The bracha seems to put together two different themes. On the one hand, acceptance of our prayers. On the other hand, return of the service in Beit HaMikdash. It would also seem that this bracha is a relative of a theme of a previous bracha, the concept of acceptance of tefillah, previous bracha, Shomei Tefillah, was about acceptance of prayer. But there's a slight difference in Retzey and a significant difference in Retzey. Because it's not about acceptance of prayer per se in Retzey, but it's about the acceptance of sacrifice. Okay? Again, I should have kept this on the screen. V'tzei Hashem Elokeinu b'amcha Yisrael v'tfilatam, Hashem avodah v'betecha v'shei Yisrael u'tfilatam b'avat tekabel b'ratzon. What is it we're asking Hashem to accept besides our tefillah? Ishei Yisrael, the fire offerings, right? The korbanot. That's what we're asking for that to be accepted. We're not bringing korbanot. The crucial word here is Retzey. Resh, tzadi, hey. Originally, if you look in the translation in English, I even probably mentioned it, for lack of a better word, we said Retzey is to find favor, which keeps the root of the word still intact. Because Retzey is ratzon, ratzah, which means a desire to be pleased, to find favor. And that word itself is found in many different forms, especially if we've been paying attention in the last few weeks. Parshat Shavua, you'll find that repeatedly throughout the Torah, and especially in Sefer Vayikra, a relationship between korbanot and other parts of the service in Beit HaMikdash. If a sacrifice is accepted, that's called nirtzah, like you say at the end of Pesach, the last section of the end of the Seder, rather. There's a famous pasuk, because it's famous not because it's a nice pasuk, but because it's also was made into many songs. I'm going to read this from my screen here. I shall bring them to my holy mountain, and I shall make them rejoice in my house of prayer. Oloteihem v'zivchehem, their offerings and their sacrifices. Next word, liratzon al mizbechi, shall be for ratzon on my mizbeach, ki veiti veitfila yikarei lechol amin, because my altar is an altar for all is a place of prayer, an altar for all houses. What's going on here in this particular pasuk? The bracha, based on using this pasuk and connected it to our bracha, is about our prayers being acceptable, being pleasing, being favored by Hashem, the same way we were asking in the Torah's recommending that a person, when they brought a korban, but it was all done properly, it would be liratzon. It would be to the quote unquote needs or the specs and the acceptance of Hashem. Once we put the bracha into the category of taking leave from Hashem's presence, again, I know we don't always ever leave Hashem's presence. We're talking about the power of that moment of being in tefillah. The difference between that and the previous bracha now, which was Shema Kolenu, we can see a difference. Let's see how. In Shema Kolenu, we're talking about a need of a person. We needed our prayers to be accepted. Why? Because if I didn't need my prayer to be accepted, what am I praying for? I don't go before Hashem and say, please, 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 I need a new bicycle. I don't think I've ever davened for that except maybe when I was a little kid. I need a new bicycle. Why would I daven for a new bicycle if I don't need a new bicycle? Well, I wouldn't daven for whatever it might be. I don't need it. But the things I'm davening for, I need. So Shema Kolenu is about a need of man, which is that we need our prayers to be accepted. What was the verb in that bracha? Kabel, the kabel brachamim v'ratzon et tfilatenu, to accept, and it goes with the adjective of brachamim. We want it to be done mercifully because we don't deserve anything. There's nothing we deserve. There's nothing we could say magiali because oh wow, I learned a daf of Gemara. I helped a person across the street. I picked someone's milk up at the makolet. You don't deserve anything for that. So it was a request in Shema Kolenu, in a sense that we were asking for what we needed and asking it to be accepted, etc. What's it about in Retzey? It's not about something we need. The Chachamim determined, so to speak, or declared that the service of Hashem is possible today only through tefillah. as I said, avodah shebelev. Retzey is kind of almost a chutzpah bracha. Because what is it we're doing? We're asking Hashem that he finds our prayer to be acceptable, pleasing in his eyes, and we're not praying for ourselves, but for Hashem. The perspective, it sounds crazy. We're davening from the perspective of Hashem. We hope that Hashem had a good experience with us. Think about that. That's pretty strong. That in a sense, what we're doing, when we're taking leave from Hashem and starting in Retzey, we're saying to Hashem, we thank you for taking your time to be with us. And we daven and we hope that it was a good experience for him. Now, let's talk about it and not that we should be positively responded to our requests or anything like that, but just that the prayer itself be like a favorable sacrifice. The same thing, the reach nichoach, the ratzon al mizbechi, liratzon, lirtzono, all these terminologies that you find in Sefer Vayikra about the pleasing before God, the acceptance for God, we're then turning that around now and saying regarding our tefillah, the same idea. But let's look at it from Hashem's perspective for a second. I'm going to obviously make up something because we don't know what he is thinking at any one time, and he knows Joe Cohn comes before Hashem in Shul in Nachalat Yitzchak, whatever, I'm making one up. He stands in davens Shacharit on a Tuesday morning and finishes Shmones, right? Finishes davening, takes up his tefillin, and goes home. From Hashem's perspective, it could be a couple of things. Wow, really, not only he pours his heart out, it is so obvious that he 100% is just completely relying on me. And it's exactly what I want. What a great relationship. Or like, why did he even bother opening his mouth? He's on his phone, he's talking and davening, he's not paying attention, he skips half the stuff. Oh, and he came in 20 minutes later with 30-minute davening. Give me a break. Okay. Which one was a good experience for Hashem? The first one. Again, we're talking only anthropomorphically. We can't attribute human qualities to Hashem. We're attributing human qualities to Hashem. We're not saying how Hashem himself is feeling. When we began the class, I don't mean tonight, but I mean a long time ago, we talked about that there's a machloket in the Gemara as to why we daven 3 times a day. One opinion was de'avuhon, that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov established a tefillah, and the other is it's in place of the korbanot. Korban in the morning, the korban shel tamid of the morning, shacharit. Korban shel tamid, the afternoon one is mincha. And then what's called the evarim et pedarim, the leftover pieces that were burning overnight, represented mariv or arvit. And the truth is that we really use both. We use both because on the one hand, we have the 3 that were established by the avot, by the patriarchs. And then as far as the timing of it is based on the concept of when the korbanot were brought. So davening, as of now, at least as of today, replaces daily korbanot. What's going to happen with time at Beit HaMikdash? Only we'll know when we see it. There's all kinds of theories. There's the theory that whatever we had before is going to continue, the same types of korbanot. Others that only private korbanot will not be brought. It'll be only the public korbanot. Others there'll be no korbanot. Don't ask me because I have absolutely no idea. Like I say, when it happens, we'll see and we'll know. But we do know, what we do know is unishama farim sifatenu, that when we pay our debt, so to speak, to Hashem, instead of the parim, instead of the korbanot, the animals, it's sifatenu, it's our lips, it's our tefillah. So because prayer replaces the daily korbanot, now we say that we hope that will be so, that just as Hashem said, that he wants the sacrifices to be liratzon, he wanted to be favorable in his eyes. So too, almost in a chutzpah way, we're saying to Hashem, we hope that our tefillah will be accepted liratzon, be a good experience also for Hashem. Is that chutzpah? Can we even presume to think that our prayers, our tefillah can be a good experience for God? Truth of the matter is, the answer is yes. we can say that because that's what the Torah said about korbanot in Beit HaMikdash. If tefillah replaces korbanot, we daven based on the times of korbanot. Certain rules about korbanot, certain philosophy about korbanot, about sacrifices, transfers over to tefillah. And just like Hashem himself said, I want it to be a good experience with every korban that's brought, so too, in a sense, he's saying now with tefillah, instead of the korbanot, it should be a good experience for me, quotes, every time we daven. It's a very, very, very tall order. The tall order is that we want to give nachas to Hashem when we daven. That's the other side of the service of Hashem. We can actually give Hashem nachat ruach. It's what was given to Hashem. Again, please, I know I keep saying it, but it's important. It's all meant using human terms to understand Hashem, to explain things. But it is we have an opportunity when we daven to give Hashem nachas. So the bracha says it should be. We start with the word Retzey, and by Adot Mizrach we also say something, an additional sentence that even has a little bit stronger of a statement. That we hope that when we say Retzey, we're saying we hope that Hashem had quote unquote pleasure both from us and our tefillot. Many years ago, I came up with a mashal or a parable, which I've shared, I'm sure, many times, that I call Hashem's refrigerator. When a child comes home from Gan, they come home from second grade, whatever, and they have drawn Tevat Noach's Ark, or they've drawn whatever it might be, and as the kids say, it's just kishkush balabush. All it is just scribble. Wow, this is beautiful. It's amazing. It's fantastic. And what do? We take a magnet. You still have a refrigerator that's, I don't remember, it's ferrous metal or non-ferrous. Think ferrous metal. That you can stick a magnet onto it. And you put it on the fridge and say, look at this. Look what my grandchild did. This is such nachas. This is beautiful. It's awesome. When we do a mitzvah, and let's just talk about mitzvot in general, let's talk specifically tefillah. I can guarantee you, the vast majority of people don't make every single tefillah the best tefillah they've ever had. Doesn't happen. Occasionally, there's a fantastic tefillah. Occasionally, there's a good tefillah. More often than not, it's run of the mill. It's just because it becomes, unfortunately, somewhat repetitive, and we don't think to how we add something new into our tefillah. But it's okay. What happens? That tefillah comes up to Hashem, and Hashem says to his malachim, to his angels, look at this tefillah that my Yossi just did, that my Miriam just did. Look at this tefillah. And it's kishkush balabush. I know. It's just a mishmash. But I'm so happy, so proud. They came to shul, or they came in their house. They stood and they said, Shemona Esrei before me. Goes up in my refrigerator for all my malachim to see. In a sense, that's what we're doing in Retzey, is we're about to leave the presence, the close presence of Hashem in our Shemona Esrei, right? That our experience is hadadi. Hadadi means mutual. That we have a good experience because we've done the right thing. Hashem has had a good experience of having nachas from us. That's the Liratzon part, which is the mirror of the Liratzon in the time of the Beit HaMikdash with korbanot. So in short, there are two aspects, I guess, of divine serving Hashem. First is that we have to recognize that absolutely, positively, every single thing we need, want, is 100% dependent on Hashem. It's dependent on my boss. I asked my boss for a raise. No, you can ask your boss. He's only or she's only the conduit. It's up to Hashem to make it happen or not happen. That's first. That everything relies on Hashem. The second is that we give Hashem something, Hashem who needs nothing, we give of ourselves. We do that by, quote, sacrificing. Time the Beit HaMikdash, the actual sacrifice. Now it's through tefillah and through requests and davening. Imagine you have a king sitting in his palace, and he has an open day where everyone could come and ask the king for things. And out of the 500 million subjects, 2 people show up. What's that a reflection of what people feel about the king? The king's not going to be able to fulfill a request. He's going to feel bad because People didn't bother showing up because here he is. I'm a beneficent king. I want to help you, and no one shows up. Or they come in and they're sitting there on their phone instead of talking to the king. The experience. That's why it's so important to understand at the beginning of this section, the last section, Shemona Esrei, really informs on us and to us what our entire perspective and demeanor should have been since the beginning of Shemona Esrei. I mean, not just Shemona Esrei, all Tefillah, but especially Shemona Esrei. When we realize that we're not really just asking anything more for ourselves at that point, should I say, but we somehow hope we have achieved the goal of our tefillah. It's not a request in the primal sense of the meaning of the word. It doesn't reflect a single need. It's just the way we take leave from Hashem, the King. And that is how we get through to this last section of Shemona Esrei, that we approach Shemona Esrei when we step into Shemona Esrei. And we thank Hashem, we don't thank Hashem, we praise Hashem, it's the Sheva. We ask for everything we want. And now as we're about to leave, imagine going back to this mashal of a human king, and you finished talking to the king for your request, and he's sitting there like this. Okay, no, next. How would you feel? How would you think he felt about that person, that particular experience? Like, I can't wait, this guy's away from me. Nevertheless, what we want is Hashem, so to speak, sitting on the edge of his chair. Oh, this was great. This is wonderful. Not easy. But if we just put a little effort in, just a little bit more than we normally might put in when we daven, it makes a big difference. Stop for a second at Retzey. Think about what you've accomplished until this point in Shemona Esrei. And even if it's not been the best tefillah, okay, I'm going to end this tefillah and end the Shemona Esrei on an up note. Okay, so that is our class for tonight. It appears that we may be into a particular time right now, Bezrat Hashem, of making some very positive, heavy-duty strides against our enemies. May Hashem watch over all the chayalim, chayalot, all the kochot bitachon, and may we get all of our chatufim back, and everyone who's ill should be healed. Bikarov. A wonderful evening, everybody.